This is the second video in a two-part exercise where we make a camera track an empty. In this video, we'll be organizing the code with some functions. Hey, I'm Victor Stepanoff. I'll be guiding you through this beginner Blender Python exercise. In this video, we'll be starting off where we left off in the previous video. If you're just joining us, I've provided a link in the description under Start Code. You can open that link in any browser, navigate to Raw, copy the code, open Blender, open the scripting workspace, and then paste in that code. If you're following along with me in the previous video and still have that code, make sure to do the following changes. So we want to make sure that the empty is getting animated, so the location property of the empty on the first frame and the last frame, like we're inserting the keyframe, and we're setting the Y to a location offset times the number of cubes. Also, another thing I forgot to do in my previous video is to set the FPS. So just add this right here, FPS, then scene render FPS, and then we're going to create a new variable FPS right here, and we're going to set the FPS to 30. At this point, we should be all aligned between the people who copied the code and who are following along with the previous video. So let me clear the scene by hitting AX and then delete, so nothing's in the scene. Let's rerun the script, and everyone should have the following, where we have the camera moving alongside with the empty, right, and it's tracking it across all these cubes. So this is what you should have at the start. If you have something different, you could just go ahead and copy the code from the link I provided. The main point of this video is to take the code that is already working and organize it in a way that makes it a bit more readable and easier to understand. Since our scripts are getting more and more complicated, we need to start using functions to organize our code. Think of functions as nodes if you're familiar with nodes in Blender or any other visual scripting language. Functions have a name, they have input parameters, and also they can have output parameters. If you're not familiar with nodes, don't worry, you'll see how this works in Python. Let's go into the interactive Python console and create a function. So I'm going to clear everything right here and make a bit more room for us. And I want to actually wrap this particular statement. Just going to copy it. And I'm just going to create a new function definition by writing def and then creating a name. So I'm going to call this function set end frame. And as you can see, as I hit enter, it automatically indents, it adds 4 spaces for us. And I'm just going to paste in the code I just copied. Since this frame count isn't set anywhere in the interactive Python console, I'm just going to set this to, let's go with, I don't know, 250. I'm going to hit enter, and there you go. There's a simple function definition. At this point, Python knows that there is a function that's called set end frame, and right now it hasn't been called yet, right? Because we need to do 2 things first. First is define it, and then we have to call it. So let me just copy this code right here, and I'm gonna call it this way. All right. So as soon as I call it, notice that it changed the number of frames in our scene from 300 to 250. This is just a basic way of defining and calling functions. One thing that we can add to this function is a pass in a parameter, so something that comes into the function. So let's just do that. I'm going to set a frame count. And I'm just gonna copy this code again, right, and paste it in. All right, so now this function takes argument that's named frame count, and it uses it right here. So let's try to call this function again. I'm just going to call it like so. And we get an error. So this way, Python is telling us that you actually have to provide, so missing one required positional argument. So it's the frame count. So now we have to provide something, and let's do that. Let's provide 300 again. So I'm going to call that, and now as you notice that the frame count updated, the end frame updated to 300 because that's what we passed in. Another thing you might have noticed when working in the interactive Python console is, for example, I'm going to import math, and I'm going to call the radians function. And when you press tab in the interactive Python console, you get this documentation string, and you get this for most of the functions that you'll see in the interactive Python console. So we could also define this as well in our own custom functions. So let's just do that. Let's see if anything is set for our function. I'm going to just remove the last brace, and I'm going to hit tab. And it doesn't really show us except the name of the function and name of the argument. But we can define a special documentation string with in the following way. So I'm gonna again define a new set end frame, and I'm gonna copy our comment right here. I'm gonna add 3 quotes and then paste in our comment, and then add 3 more quotes and hit enter. All right, and I'll just copy the code again and paste it in right here like so, and hit enter again. So now we have a function that's defined with a parameter and a documentation string. So let's see how that looks. So I'm gonna write set end frame, and you can see that it provided us the documentation string that we just defined here. So this is a easy way to define your own documentation and allow, maybe you'll be defining some functions in your own Python modules in the future that other people will be using, and this way you can provide easy documentation for them right in the interactive Python console of Blender. All right, now let's take the function we defined in the interactive Python console and move it into our script. So I'm just going to take all this, copy it, and I'll paste it right here. I'm going to remove these extra characters at the start. So this is the function that we're going to be using to set our frames. And instead of doing this right here, we're going to call our function like so. And let's just change this to 250, for example. Let's delete everything, and let's rerun the script. And you can see the script now sets the final keyframe at frame 250. And this is done because of exactly this call right here. I would usually recommend you to organize your functions at the very top of your script. So I would move this over here. And this way you're creating your parameters, and you're calling this set end frame function. All right, let's look at another example. I'm going to show you a couple more examples, and then you're going to try it on your own. Let's convert this piece of code right here into a function as well. I'm just going to hit Control X to cut this, and I'll paste it up here. I'm going to create a function to call it create row. I'm going to select all this and then hit tab to indent. I'm going to turn this comment into a documentation string. We will need to pass in 2 things here. It's the cube count and this location offset. So I'm going to copy this and set it as a first parameter. and the location offset as well, and set it like so. As you can see, you can have multiple parameters you can pass into your function. I'm gonna call this function right here, and let's delete everything from the scene and rerun the script. All right, looks like the script is still working, even with our new function. Naming things in programming is also quite a challenging task. Sometimes you can't think of a good name for particular functions or variables, and that's okay. Just think of something that works well. Make sure that it's not that's more than one character, so don't have variables like A, B, C, right? Make it readable so you or someone else could come back to this code and understand this like what you're doing, right? So I use this create row. I'm personally not a super big fan of it. I don't really like it, but nothing comes to mind at this point in time. If you have a better name, you could make sure to share in the comments, or maybe create your own. All right, let's take another example, and let's return something from a function. So I'm going to take this code right here that's going to create our empty. I'm going to cut it with Control X. I'm going to paste it in, and I'm going to define it, and this is going to be pretty straightforward. So it's create empty. I'm going to select everything by holding Shift and the down arrow and then pressing Tab to indent it. Right, if I don't indent it, this will be an error in Python, like Python won't understand. We'll be expecting some indentation after we define a function. So I'm gonna indent it like so. And we can also return things from functions by writing return. And then I'm gonna return this variable right here that's referencing our empty that we just created. So I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna paste it here. Also, I'm gonna create a variable that's gonna receive this empty right here, this variable. So we're returning from this function. Again, this doesn't have to be, this doesn't have to have the same name. I'm just gonna keep it, just to keep it short. If you have parameters coming into the function, it doesn't mean you can't have things returning from a function. So you could have as many parameters as you want, and you can return as many things as you want as well. But I would usually keep it to 1 or 2 things in the return statement, and about 6 parameters into your functions. If you're seeing that you need more parameters, I would suggest you use a dictionary, but that's a topic for another video. And also, I totally forgot to make a documentation string out of this comment. And if you're learning something new, make sure to hit the like button. It will help me tremendously. Okay, at this point, I want you to try to create functions on your own. We have some code here that you could turn into functions. So all of these with the comments, you could turn into their own functions. So go ahead and try to do this on your own, and hit pause on the video. I'll explain this after a brief pause. All right, here's the code that I got after moving everything into functions. Don't worry if some of the names don't match what you have. There's a number of ways you can name something, so just make sure that you were able to create some functions. And if you didn't, it's totally fine. We're just practicing, so you could always go back in this video maybe in a week, so when you kind of already forget a couple of things, and try to do it again. So don't worry, it's totally fine to not get it on your first try. So the main code right here I have is just defining the parameters, and then all these function calls that are going to set up our scene. You can see that this could be read almost like some text, where we create some parameters, set them to some values. We set the end frame, set the FPS, right? We create a row. Again, I'm not a big fan of this name. might be a bit ambiguous. What exactly is it? A row of monkey heads or spheres or whatever, right? Like maybe there's a better name, and I hope maybe you have one. Then we create this empty, we animate the empty. Again, a bit ambiguous. Maybe we should name it animate empty location. That will give someone who's reading this, so it might be you or someone else in the future. You always need to think about who's going to be reading your script in the future, and how much you can communicate with a name. Then we have a number of parameters we're passing in. Same thing goes with a camera. We create the camera, we animate the camera. Again, could be a better name. Then we can we set the track constraint on the camera and start tracking this empty. So as you can see, you could start reasoning about the code just by looking at this, instead of looking at this big script, right? Trying to read every line and understand what's going on. You just kind of have start building these kind of chunks about what a certain function is doing, and you can really concentrate on particular parts of the script that maybe there's an issue, or maybe you want to do some improvement, instead of just keeping this whole script in your head, right? So that's kind of the main idea that you want to that I want you to get away from this video. So let's go up and look at the functions themselves. The very first function we did together, it was straightforward. The second function here is the set FPS. It's done in the same way, so we just moved the code here and just created a documentation string. Next we have the create row, which we went over together, the create empty as well. So the thing that that I did on my own was this animate empty. And you can see there's a number of parameters that we're passing in. So we could have, remember, multiple parameters coming into a function. Again, we just moved the code and indented it and moved the comment that we had into a documentation string. So this right here is getting called like so. Remember, we don't really need to name all these parameters in the same way as inside of this function. I just left it this way. It was just a lot easier. So next we have the add camera. It's pretty similar to the create empty. The only thing that's different here is that we're changing the location. Next we have the animate camera. Again, we're passing a number of parameters, and you can actually see the similarities between the animate camera and the animate empty. You could actually go a bit further with these two functions and create a more general function that could be named animate object. And instead of using this camera, just use like an object name, so it could be more general, and you could use that like animate object here and here, because in this particular case we're animating the empty and the camera in the same way. I would advise you to try this on your own and see how that works out. Next we have the track empty. Right, it's pretty straightforward. We're passing in the object. In this case, it's the camera. And then we have the empty object. We create the constraint on the currently active object, which is the empty. And we set the target, or sorry, not the currently active object, which is the camera. And we set the target to the empty. All right, so you could see that this code right here is a bit more manageable to kind of keep in your head and understand what is going on in the code. And that's the main thing that I want you to take away from this particular video. All right, I'll be posting a link to this final code in the description as well. And thank you so much for watching. And make sure to subscribe for more videos like this.